Dark Horse Chapter 6. Flanked by agents Jim Flannery and Oscar Baker, who had proved his discretion in the mission of the Roses, Eddie swept into campaign headquarters at 9 o'clock the next morning. Behind him trailed Pete Stackpole and a brigade of neatly dressed, self-conscious young men, minor aides from the Hudson campaign. Eddie was discovering that every time he took a few steps he became a troop movement. His only solitary voyages were to the bathroom. He was in good spirits, although still shy of sleep and annoyed with the specialists assigned to him by the Kingmakers. The experts, earnest, pedantic men, for the most part, breakfasted with him at the Hay Adams Hotel and managed to spoil the taste of his ham and eggs. They were slated to meet with him again before the press conference. It was so much their clinical attitude that bothered Eddie, but the fact that they owed their fealty to others. Apart from Pete Stackpole, who was still on probation in Eddie's mind, he was a candidate among strangers. He hungered for someone he knew and trusted. He vaguely considered telephoning the mayor of New Brunswick, the New Jersey Turnpike publicity man, Phil Liccardo, or possibly R. Dan Finelli, his old roommate who thought big thoughts out in California. Best of all, Eddie realized, would be Kate Witherspoon. The congresswoman knew her way around Washington. He trusted her despite the wide gap in their lifestyles, and she was beautiful. Then he remembered that telegram. What got into her, Eddie sighed. Campaign headquarters on the 5th floor of the 1140 building on Connecticut Avenue was inhabited by a sharply decreased population since the death of Senator Hudson and the subsequent plunge in the party's fortunes. Some 20 speechwriters, schedule makers, advance men, flax, secretaries, and typists stood by their desks and applauded as Eddie entered. He noted that special look he had come to accept as routine, a kind of idle, pleased curiosity evoked by any instant celebrity from suicidal rock stars to grandfathers who improbably crossed the Atlantic on 20-foot sailboats. "Good morning," said Eddie. "I'd like to introduce our new campaign manager, Mr. Pete D. Stackpole." Pete grinned unhappily. While he had fully expected the post, this was the first time Eddie had mentioned it. "Everybody just keep on doing whatever you're doing until further notice," said Eddie. "Pete and I are going to sit down and try and figure out our next moves. Any and all bright ideas are welcomed." Stackpole led the way down a side corridor, shucking off the escort of self-conscious young men. A door at the end bore a shining new plaque, "Mr. Quinn." Eddie wished he had been consulted. He would have preferred Commissioner Quinn. A glossy rubber plant adorned one side of the doorway, an American flag the other. On facing wooden benches sat a dozen people, one of them a trim young black woman under a mushroom of hair. Eddie halted and stared. "Margot!" He pulled her to her feet and embraced her. Talk about surprises! Eddie stepped back and looked at her with some apprehension. "You look great, Margot. What brings you here?" "I've got some ideas," she said, "and I just thought you might need some help." "Help? You can say that again." He scanned the other people sitting like waiting patients in a doctor's office, over the shoulder of Margot Hicks. "Hey, what do you know, Hunk? And R. Danny, this is like old home week." Eddie was overjoyed to spy some old friends at last. He left Margot and began pumping the hand of an elderly man who wore a frayed blue serge suit and carried a brown paper satchel, then slapped the back of the man sitting next to him. "R. Dan, you old egghead. Meet my uncle, Frank Jenwinski, from B Branch, Arkansas. Hunk, this is R. Dan Finelli, my old roommate at Seton Hall." While the men shook hands, Eddie waved Margot Hicks into the circle and made the introductions all over again. Hunk Jenwinski took Margot's outstretched hand as though it might contain a summons. "Well, let's see now," said Eddie. "I want to talk to all of you." "Eddie," Stackpole gripped Eddie's elbow, "we have a lot of calls to make. You've got the press conference at 11 and—" "Got to see my old friends," Eddie insisted. "Okay, ladies first. Come on in with me, Margot. See you in a few minutes, R. Dan. Then you, Hunk." He turned to the other people on the benches. I'll try to make time, folks." Stackpole groaned. Eddie paused at the door. Under dripping blonde hair, the face of a girl peered up at him with a beseeching look. The large eyes were pale blue and without innocence. "Hi, what's your name?" "T.G. Churchill. I was supposed to be a spy." "Supposed to be? What kind of spy?" "Political. The pinholster people wanted me to dig out your plans or something, but I'd rather work for you." "What can you do, Teague?" "I can't type or anything. I'm best at relating to people." "Can you take notes? Organize?" "Sure." She sang the word softly with 2 syllables. Eddie grinned. "Fine. While I'm talking to some old friends, you ask each one of these people out here why they want to see me. Be ready to report in about half an hour, okay?" "Right. Terrific, Mr. Quinn." Agent Baker took up a post in the corridor. Eddie opened the door for Margot Hicks while Stackpole and Flannery pressed close behind. Eddie found himself in a small room, darkly paneled. A plump young woman froze from her seat behind a typewriter. She appeared both efficient and embarrassed. "This is Joy Peterson," said Stackpole. She was Senator Hudson's receptionist secretary. "Hello, Joy. Want to work for me?" "I'd be happy to." "Sold. Is this my office?" Eddie headed toward an inner door. It opened on a larger room, paneled carpeted in dark brown and fronting on Connecticut Avenue. There were several chairs, a leather sofa, and an enormous desk with but 3 objects on it: the World Almanac, the Congressional Directory, and a small metal vase which held a single rose. Eddie speculated again as to whether Kate had liked his flowers. He held the door open for Margot. Flannery stepped forward. "Sorry, miss, but you'd better leave that handbag out here." "Oh." Margot and Eddie both looked surprised. She handed Flannery the small black purse. "You'd think I'd tried to harm this man?" "No," said Flannery. "Just the routine when we haven't been able to set up the usual security screening." Stackpole, harried, looked at his wristwatch. I'll find me an office somewhere. Try to keep it short, Eddie. A half hour for your friends, okay?" Flannery settled in a chair opposite Joy Peterson. Stackpole shrugged and left. In the inner office, Eddie grasped Margot's hands. "You're looking good as ever, Margot. I didn't recognize you for a minute in that afro. Looks great. Real class." She wore a snug white knit dress, and Eddie thought fleetingly of a hot fudge sundae. Her slight smile hinted both amusement and cynicism. Eddie remembered that this was the woman who could sense his next move before he thought of it. "Thanks. You look okay yourself." She sank into the couch and draped an arm over a leather cushion. "You scared of me, Eddie?" "Scared? No, but I was surprised to see you." "You looked like I was a bill collector." "Relax. We don't know each other anything. I know you're hard up for time, so I'll talk fast. When I heard your speech last night, I remembered this idea I've had about our time in New York, and I've said, why not? Eddie Quinn's a man who will listen." "If you've got a good idea, Margot, you've come to the right place. I need all I can get." "Well, let me ask you a question first, and tell me straight." She no longer smiled. How do you feel these days about black people?" Eddie felt himself tense. "I get along with them," he said warily. "Of course, I don't know too many. A couple of friends at the Turnpike office and a guy who lives next to me at the motel. I think I got closest to you that weekend." Margot shook her head. "You didn't learn much about me. You didn't try, but that's not what I mean. I mean black people in general. You know, the big problem." "Oh, that." Eddie frowned. "I think we've got plenty of laws on the books. Negroes had a lousy deal for hundreds of years. Now it's up to the black guy to make it just like the Irish and the Jews made it." "Yeah, I figured you'd say just that." "Why?" Eddie bridled. "What the hell's wrong with that?" "Nothing, Eddie." The knowing little smile flicked on again. "You don't understand. I caught your welfare crack last night, but that can't be helped right now. You're honest and open, and that does help. What I'd like to see you do is just say what you believe, but speak up in the right places." "What are you getting at?" Again, Eddie reminded himself that this woman was usually a jump or two ahead. "I mean that you could do yourself and black people a big favor right now, Eddie, by walking around black neighborhoods, say in Harlem, Newark, and Detroit." "Just walking?" Eddie was puzzled. "Yeah, just walking and rapping," said Margot, lapsing into a drawl. Anybody asks you what you got going, what you're going to do for black people if you get elected, you say nothing. Only you're going to give everybody a fair shake. You tell them what you believe. And what will that do for anybody? Plenty. You see, Eddie, black people are fed up with the phony liberal promises. Give you this, give you that, then nothing happens that much changes. I know my people, and we all know what white bullshit is. The white politicians talk at us, not with us. What we want is a guy who acts like we're his equals. If he walks the streets with us at night, then we know he cares enough to show himself off. He ain't afraid of us. Eddie shook his head. Sounds too simple to me, Margot. Just walking the streets? Yeah, just tramping around. Margot stood up and began to pace the floor. Like this. Hi, man, what's new? I'm Eddie Quinn. You walk the streets from 10 to midnight in maybe 3 cities? That's 6 hours maximum out of the 18 days you got left. Then you sit back and let that streetwire hum with the news. I don't believe it. Eddie stared at Margot as she walked out. I saw a poll the other day. Penholster was getting 91%, I think he was, of the black vote. Against Hudson. Margot stopped pacing and stood before Eddie's desk. Against an old man so white he didn't have no shadow. Listen, Eddie, you preached to us last night that you weren't the same as those white dudes who picked you. You got to convince black people that they got to join up with the Eddie Quinns and the Poles and the Italians and the rest of the working men to get a fair shake for everybody at the bottom. And the way you do that is by walking, not talking, big on TV. We don't trust white words. We look at what a white man does. Eddie, no presidential candidate ever walked through the ghettos at midnight. It would bring a new feeling. You can't understand unless you're black. Just believe me, Eddie. Just believe me. Eddie said nothing, and Margot leaned across the desk. You chicken? What you got to lose? Only what I'm going to lose anyway, I guess. Margot walked back to the couch. You see, Eddie, I think I know you. Her voice softened. You got a prejudice, all right, against a race that's black. That's why I called you a white racist that night. But when you deal with a black person, I don't feel any bad vibes. I feel that, so it must be true. So if you walk the streets with me and some of the brothers and sisters, and you rap with people, well, they'll feel what I feel. That's good. Good for everybody. Good for me, for you, for lots of voters. You're not going to solve any problems anyway, so why not make people feel good? Eddie grinned. You make me feel good, Margot. He watched her silently for a moment. Hey, I tell you what. Eddie rose from his chair. How about joining up with me? You can be an advisor. Pick out some title. I'll get you a salary, enough to carry you here in Washington. What do you say? I already took a 3-week leave of absence. Always 3 jumps ahead of me. Let me see how important I am. Eddie studied the squawk box, flicked a key, and said, Joy, please have somebody hustle a desk for a new staffer. Name of Margot Hicks, Hicks. And send in Mr. R. Dan Finelli. He's waiting in the hall. Eddie put his arm around Margot and walked her to the door. Don't wander far, Margot. We'll get some people in here for some planning as soon as I learn the ropes around here. R. Dan Finelli came on with a noisy gusto. He was 5 inches shorter than Eddie, tubby and simmering like a pot about to boil over. Prematurely white eyebrows beneath a mop of black hair gave him a pixie look. He took a boxer's stance and aimed right at Eddie's chest. Meathead! Egghead! Eddie grabbed Ardan's fist, yanked him close, and thumped his back. The former roommates squandered time swapping affectionate insults and catching up on each other. Eddie learned that Ardan had spent the summer touring France with his wife, sampling most of the wines and making every restaurant rated 2 stars or better by the Guide Michelin. Eddie also learned what the Guide Michelin was. Ardan, in turn, found that Eddie's appetite for women was as robust as ever, and that his idea of a perfect travel was still 4 wheels humming along a ribbon of asphalt. You could have knocked me over with a Kleenex when I caught that radio bulletin from Houston, said Ardan. Jesus, I still can't believe it. And when I heard you giving that shaft to Witherspoon Heron in that crowd, I felt like firing off a rocket. Then I had this big idea. Screw the little ones. What? And I knew you'd at least give me a hearing. Want me to shoot? Fire away, but don't try to con me with any of your radical ideas. I play the center, Dan, not out in left field with you. Maybe, maybe not. If I remember our talk last year, I think you kid yourself some, Eddie. Sitting on the leather couch, our Dan kept in constant movement, shifting his legs, pulling off his black-rimmed glasses, twisting a lock of hair. You have any hope of winning? Of course not. On the other hand, as long as they've marked me for sacrifice, I'd like to get in some good licks before they cut my throat. Good, Eddie. I think this system has damn near had it. Our Dan raised a palm to stave off interruption. You don't agree, but man, I've traveled all over the country, and I'm telling you, people are scared and bitter. They plain don't trust the government anymore. They think pinholster's a fake. Inflation is killing them. They're suspicious of the military, figuring its size and power will drag us into another Vietnam, or worse. On the other hand, they're afraid we'll have another depression if military spending is cut much. They hate bureaucracy. They can smell taste in dirty skies and rivers, and they're afraid the good American life is going down the drain. You make it sound worse than it is, but I can't argue with the mood. I know what you mean. All right. Now, since you can't win anyway, why not forget about chasing votes? Zero in on educating the country. They'll listen to you because you're one of them. Our Dan paused, then leaned forward. Shock 'em, Eddie. Make 'em understand. Shock 'em with ridicule. Shock them with exaggeration. Make them think, goddammit. You gave them a little taste last night. Now make them realize how the so-called establishment runs this country for its own benefit, and how we've got to redistribute wealth and services and opportunities if the country's going to survive. You've got the wrong party, Ardan. Eddie felt himself pulling back from his pal, as he invariably did when the ideas began to pelt him like hailstones, and the wrong guy. It's not my bag to go around shocking people. What the hell it isn't. What do you think you did to that mob in the Astro World ballroom last night when you opened up on the country club set? Think a minute, Eddie. You're the first real ethical guy ever nominated for president by a major party in this country. Okay, there was Kennedy, but he was one of the new Irish aristocrats, a co-ed Harvard boy, and you're different, man. The country senses it already. Millions of voters are fed up with that old establishment crowd and ready to listen to you. I don't know, those cracks just slipped out last night. I surprised myself. But they were honest. Ardan smacked a palm with his fist. The sincerity came through, and you were dead right, Eddie. Right. What do you mean by shocking people? Give me an example. Okay, take taxes. I bet you've already had some heat from Witherspoon and Cuthbert and those boys over taxes, right? Well, last night on the plane, I was kicking the subject around while I hoisted a few, and here's my thinking. Ardan talked for 10 minutes, splattering his thoughts like careless paint, shifting constantly on the sofa, gesticulating. As Eddie listened, several ideas caught fire. Once, he stopped Ardan and told him what Margot Hicks said. Maybe my pitch ought to be a fair shake as well. Right as rain, said Ardan. There ought to be an alliance between blacks and Puerto Ricans and all the working stiffs, the Italians, Poles, Hungarians, Czechs, people who want to make it in the system. As it is, they're fighting for crumbs and from the big boys' table. You walk the ghetto at night and you become the symbol of a new shake for the black man. No more phony programs from WASP liberals who are salving their own guilt. But Eddie's saying no more bullshit. Let's treat one another fairly, and the rest is up to you. Another 10 minutes slipped by as Ardan talked. Joy buzzed and said Uncle Jenwinski was getting restless. Stackpole called, reminding Eddie that he meet with the specialist before the press conference. Eddie stalled for more time. Danny, I'm hard up for guys like you. I need people around that I know and trust. What are you doing for the next 3 weeks? Nothing earth-shaking. We're flexible at the center. How about staying up here as an idea man? Why, you think I hopped a jet last night? Why do you think I hopped a jet last night? Is that a firm offer? It is. Stackpole will wet his pants when he hears I've signed on a heavy thinker from the center. Too bad. Like I told him last night, I'm the man who has the nomination. Okay, I'll go hunt a desk. No, stay here. I've got another idea. I want you to listen to my Uncle Hunk. Frank Jenwinski was a man on a mission. He shot a querulous glance at Ardan as he entered, shuffled to Eddie's desk, and deposited his brown paper package. Them's letters back and forth with Social Security, he said. Must be a couple pounds of 'em. They owe me $4.88 more a month, but they won't pay. Damnedest bunch of snot noses I ever see. I was going to send them to you, Eddie, but I never been to Washington, so I decided to take the airplane and bring them myself." The old man had a stubble of whiskers in sunken pockets of his cheeks. His Adam's apple bobbed like a huge wayward bearing. His shoulders drooped and one leg dragged, but he boasted a fine shock of white hair and a look of guile in his watery eyes. "How's the leg, Hunk?" asked Eddie. "Fusses up sometimes in fall weather," he replied. He turned to Finelli. "Lost part of the son of a bitch shinin' old Wilson's War, and ain't never been the same since. Come out of it better than my oldest boy, though. They shot him up bad in Roosevelt's War, and he spent 5 years in and out of them vet hospitals." Hunk sneezed. He pulled a handkerchief from his hip pocket and blew into it with a medley of snorts and wheezes. "Then they drafted 2 of my grandsons for Johnson's War, and one of them, Joe, he left half his foot somewhere over one of them rice paddies. I guess the only war where a Jenwinski didn't lose something was old Truman's, but they sure drafted the hell out of B Branch that time. Took 7 boys, I think it was. 2 of my nephews from the Quinns went too, but Eddie never had to go to Korea. Did you, Eddie?" "Nope. I spent my time playing baseball for the Fort Myer, Virginia team. Damn good, too. We only lost 2 games. "How old are you, Mr. Jenwinski?" asked R. Dan. "Born in '99. You figure it out. I don't like to count 'em no more." He blasted his handkerchief again, then folded it carefully before stuffing it into his hip pocket. "You've lived through a lot of wars," said R. Dan. "I take it you're no great friend of the military." Hunk squinted suspiciously at Finelli. "Now, just one little minute, son. Don't go bunching me in with all them long-haired kids parading up and down and yelling hell no, they won't go, like they did during old Lyndon's War. Lot of goddamn communists, if you ask me. No, sir, I honor the flag and the uniform. Only thing is, a lot of them slick politicians, like the ones Eddie took down a peg last night, have gone sticking our nose all around the world in places that don't belong. I don't hold with all them demonstrators. Hell, a lot of white kids gotten just like the Negroes was marching up against in Little Rock just last week. I tell you one thing, any of them demonstrating people come down the road to B Branch and they're going to get some lead, because I'm going to be sitting on my porch with a shotgun." Hunk suddenly stopped. "How come that Negro girl got in here before we did, Eddie?" "Ladies first," said Eddie. "She's an old friend, Hunk. Margot Hicks. She's going to be one of my advisors." Hunk digested the information with a grinding of his Adam's apple. "You gonna have a Negro around here?" His success in tidying up the noun was achieved only after an obvious effort of will. "Sure, Margot's smart. I need all the help I can get." Hunk pondered with a frown. "I guess everything's changing," he sighed. "Reminds me of the other night, along around dark. I was sitting on the porch and this Chevy comes chugging along and then sputters and quits right by my mailbox. 2 fellas get out and mess around under the hood, then one of them walks up the path to the house. Neat dressed fella, tie and all, and says, 'Mr. Jenwinski?' He seen my name on the box. He asked if he can borrow a wrench if I had one. Real nice spoken. City fella from Detroit. Well, I give him one from the shed and they tinker around some and get the Chevy going again. Then he brings back the wrench and thanks me and says it's a pleasure to find folks in B Branch so accommodating. Now, you wouldn't find anyone like him stomping around with signs on the highway. If they were more like him, he wouldn't have no trouble." You'll get along okay with Margot, Hunk," said Eddie. "What do you mean by that?" "I'd like to sign you on for my campaign staff. We need someone like you." "Oh, no, you don't." Hunk threw up his hands. "I just brung up the papers to see if you could straighten it out, and to do some sightseeing." Hunk's garrulous confidence shriveled. "Eddie, you don't want an old man like me around. I ain't even made a crop in 10 years. "Sure I do." Eddie left his chair and perched on the corner of the desk. "Look, Hunk, we're all city people and younger than you. I need somebody who's been around a long time and who lives in a small town and knows what country people are worrying about." "What would I do?" "Just listen and speak your mind. If you hear us dreaming up some screwball idea, tell us we're full of crap. Also, Hunk, a lot of wise guys try to con a candidate, especially a new boy like me. I need old pals around who will level with me." Uncle Jenwinski eyed Eddie with a shrewd look. You don't trust them rich guys who put you in from what you said between the lines. Is that it? Now you've got it. Well, I guess I could stay for a few days. It's a deal. Eddie pressed a key on the intercom. Joy, send in that young lady with the blonde hair, Miss Teague something, and tell Mr. Stackpole I'll be ready in 10 minutes. Teague glided into the office and took to the chair indicated by Eddie. She wore a turtlenecked green crochet dress that ended several inches above her knees. A macrame bag hung from her shoulder. Hi, she said it softly on a breath of wonder. I'm Teague Churchill, in case you've forgotten, Mr. Quinn. Eddie, he corrected. He made the introduction as Teague favored each man with her most sincere smile. Now, what was that business about being a spy? I said that to catch your attention. She caressed her hair off her forehead. But it's true. You see, I was working for Governor Penholster for 2 days, and Jeff Smithers, the manager, assigned me to infiltrate your headquarters and report back your strategy and stuff. I agreed, but this morning, after thinking more about your speech and all, I decided it wasn't right. Well, spying's okay, but I didn't want to spy on you. Why not? Eddie was enjoying himself. Well, like you were honest, sort of, last night, and I admire honesty, so it would be a cop-out for me to not be straight myself. She looked at Hunk. Wouldn't it? Hunk frowned. His life encompassed no T.G. Churchills. What have you got to offer us? Asked Eddie. I'd work real hard at anything. That is, if you'll forgive me for the spy stuff, which I didn't actually do. Why, Eddie? Asked Ardan. I think Penholster would be more your style. That's funny, Mr. Finelli. I was thinking that way about you. It's just that I heard Eddie's speech last night and I got excited. You said things differently, and you really told off the system, sort of. Eddie was beginning to realize that his speech had made a similar impression on widely varying types of people. I wish I could have seen my father's face when you were talking, added T.G. He's in advertising. I don't get along with my parents. How old are you, miss? Asked Hunk. 24 last April, and that's another good sign. Being an Aries, I knew I could work for a Gemini. You believe in all that hocus pocus? Hunk was suspicious. I don't buy it at all, but signs give you a clue. But don't get the idea I'm an astrology nut or something. Tell me about yourself, said Eddie. She told about her home in Westport, Connecticut, college at Mount Hoykel, the master's at Columbia, and rooming with the econ major who worked for Ralph Nader. T.G. said the system wasn't working and she wanted to help change it, and she guessed Eddie would make more impact for change than Penholster would. Although, she concluded, I definitely won't agree with you, Eddie, about automobiles. We've got to have decent public transportation or we'll strangle from all the pollution when the whole landscape's paved over. Eddie smiled but made no response. Instead, he asked for her report on his visitors waiting outside. T.G. opened a notebook, drawn from her bag. They're all okay, she said, but I guess there's only one you or somebody ought to talk to. That's a Mr. Mancini from Baltimore. He's got some ideas on how to line up all the Sons of Italy clubs behind you and also raise campaign funds through a raffle he runs in some of the clubs. He heard your speech and he's fired up. The others? Well, 3 girls want typing jobs. There's a man with a genealogy on the Quinn family and 2 old Greek ladies who want to volunteer for telephone duty. And 1 guy has a scheme to recycle cans. And another wants to sell you a big folder with Penholster's silliest quotes in it. And 4 women who took an early morning bus from Wilmington, Delaware want you to address their Holy Name Society. She closed the pad. I guess that's it. Okay. For a spook, you're a good reporter, said Eddie. You're invited to join the campaign staff. Let's hope Penholster's loss is our game. Let's see now. Eddie glanced at his watch, pressed an intercom key. Joy, tell Pete Stackpole to come in and find Margot Hicks and have her join us. When Stackpole arrived a few seconds behind Margot Hicks, he scanned Eddie's friends as he might a band of students who had just seized the proctor's office. He was in his shirt sleeves, tie loosened, and he vibrated with frantic purpose. Let's go, Eddie. First the briefing, then drive to the Statler Hilton for the press conference. Slow down, Pete, said Eddie. I want you to meet my new S&T board. Your what? Pete paused just inside the door, hands on his hips. S&T, strategy and tactics. Stackpole honored this obvious joke with a perfunctory smile. Great, fine, but let's get moving. No, I mean it. Eddie pointed to Finelli. R. Dan Finelli, Ideas and Plans. Margot Hicks, Black Liaison and Consumers. T.G. Churchill, Youth, Environment. And Frank Janwinski, Problems of the Elderly, Rural, Government Red Tape. Pete's mouth sagged. His eyes roved the circle, then back to Quinn. You're not serious. Sure. Good mix. Besides, I like them and trust them. Eddie, let me talk to you in the next room a minute. Stackpole was exasperated now. No secrets. If you've got a beef, let's air it here. Christ, Eddie. Stackpole struggled for words. I mean, I respect these people, but we're running a national campaign for President of the United States. We have a first-rate, savvy, old pro staff out there. He motioned with his head. We can't go up against Penholster with untried troops. It'll never work. I'm not firing the pros, said Eddie, but when they unload ideas on me, I want to test them on some friends I trust. I need the thinking of some average Joes. This is one hell of a mistake, Eddie. Come on, Pete. Eddie threw an arm around Pete's shoulders. You know and I know that we don't have a chance to win. Take it easy, man. What have we got to lose? A lot of races for Congress and state houses, that's all. You're sure you're not thinking about the static from Witherspoon and Cuthbert and Charlie Heron? Some. Jesus, Eddie, we have to be practical. That's just what we're going to be. Practical and down to earth. You've got to understand, Pete, I feel more comfortable with old friends. I can't suddenly be taken over by strangers. Now how we doing on time? The press conference starts in 45 minutes. All networks are covering it live, so we're on camera at 11. Okay then. Eddie slid back into his chair. Let's skip the experts this morning. Time for them later. The country can hear me straight without prompting. I want to keep this simple. You're wrong, Eddie. Stackpole's voice had lost its snap. This Washington press corps is sharp. Could be, but maybe we are too. Anyway, let's just settle back for a few minutes and yak so you can get to know one another. The minutes flew by. T.G. shared a chocolate bar with Hunk Janwinski, listened to his Social Security complaints, and explained that the econ major she roomed with was not a woman. Stackpole tried, without success, to fit Finelli into familiar ideological slot while Margot and Eddie discussed Atlanta, welfare, and Julian Bond. Joy's voice broke from the squawk box. The White House is calling, Mr. Quinn. Eddie winced. After his applauded crack last night about half-baked answers cooked up in Washington, he expected the worst. He took the call and heard the well-known voice, resonant with the battle against anxiety. Good morning, Mr. Commissioner. The Diplomatic Corps wants to get a look at you. It's an unusual request, but it appears you've stirred some interest abroad. I'll oblige if I can, Mr. President. Fine. The ambassadors are wondering whether you could meet with them tomorrow afternoon at the Pan American Union. I said I'd help put 'em on your arm. I think it would be a courteous gesture if you can spare the time. Sure. Eddie was relieved to be spared a reprimand. Anything you say. Good. Dr. Alvarez, the Dean of the Corps, will be in touch with your people on time. Hanging up after the stilted goodbyes, Eddie filled in his staff. How about that? The ambassadors want to meet me. Hey, that's cool, said T.G. I had a chance to meet the Yugoslav ambassador last summer, but then I came down with mono. Eddie stood up. Time for the press conference. Let's go. I want you all to come along. As they filed out the door, Eddie drew R. Dan aside. I'm going to ride with that tax idea of yours. I like it. It ought to shake him up for starters. Sure will, but what if you're not asked about taxes? That's your job. I know one reporter who's been assigned to cover me, Anderson of the Associated Press out of the Trenton Bureau, a little guy with specs and jug ears. I point him out to you, then you kind of casually suggest it to him. R. Dan looked at his friend with a surprise. Mr. Strait is going devious? The word is prepared, Dan, said Eddie. You see, yesterday morning when they called me to the Astro World, I went without my socks. Today, on my way to the press conference, I'm not going without my wits.